Can't keep up? Then leave, she said, while her influencer friends recorded me. I'd been with Sierra for 4 years, watching our authentic love slowly transform into unpaid labor for her personal brand. What started as genuine adventures became calculated content opportunities, and I should have realized sooner that I'd become just another prop in her carefully curated world. I'm Jake, a wilderness photographer who makes my living capturing the raw beauty of places most people will never see. At 32, I've spent the last decade building a reputation for authenticity in an industry increasingly dominated by filters and artificial staging. My work focuses on conservation, documenting landscapes before they disappear, finding meaning in moments that matter beyond social media metrics. Sierra was different when we met 4 years ago, or at least I thought she was. Back then, she had maybe 15,000 followers and genuinely cared about wellness and mindfulness. We had met at a coffee shop in Denver where she was reading a book about forest bathing, not scrolling through her phone. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, covering everything from meditation techniques to the therapeutic value of disconnecting from technology. I fell for her curiosity, her seeming desire to experience life fully rather than just document it. But success changed her. Her follower count exploded to 350,000. Brands started throwing money at her, and suddenly every moment of our relationship needed to serve her content strategy. Our private conversations became material for her inspirational posts. Date nights transformed into photo shoots where I held lights and adjusted camera angles. Weekend getaways required scouting locations for optimal lighting and backdrop aesthetics rather than actually enjoying our time together. The Costa Rica retreat should have been my wake-up call months before it happened. Sierra had been invited by a major supplement company to document their exclusive wellness experience. All expenses paid plus a substantial fee for content creation. She'd asked me to come as her photographer, though she framed it as a romantic couple's getaway. I should have recognized the difference between being invited as her partner versus being hired as unpaid crew. The retreat itself was everything I'd learned to dread about Sierra's world. 7 other influencers, each with massive followings, all competing for the most engaging content while pretending to seek enlightenment in the Costa Rican jungle. Everyone traveled with ring lights, backup phones, and endless costume changes. The brand coordinator, Phoenix, encouraged increasingly dramatic content, suggesting storylines and manufacturing conflicts for better engagement. I tried to adapt. I helped Sierra set up shots, carried her equipment, stayed quiet while she filmed take after take of spontaneous moments that required 20 minutes of preparation. But something about the environment felt toxic in a way I couldn't ignore. These people weren't experiencing anything genuine. They were performing experiences, turning every sunset, every meal, every meditation session into content opportunities. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a silent meditation session in an open-air pavilion deep in the jungle. The group had gathered at sunrise, and the setting was genuinely beautiful. Morning light filtered through the canopy, birds called from the trees, and the air carried the rich scent of tropical vegetation. For a few moments, I thought we might actually experience something real. But within minutes, phones were out. The influencers began positioning themselves for optimal angles, adjusting their yoga poses for better lighting, whispering about which filters would enhance the jungle backdrop. Sierra started directing me with hand signals, pointing to where she wanted me to position my camera, indicating which angles would capture her best side. I suggested we could actually try meditating instead of filming it, keeping my voice low to avoid disrupting others. The reaction was immediate and brutal. 7 phones turned toward me like spotlights, their cameras suddenly focused on capturing whatever drama was about to unfold. I realized I'd walked into an ambush, that my suggestion to experience something authentic had become the content opportunity they'd been waiting for. Sierra's face transformed. The gentle spiritual expression she'd been cultivating for her camera disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. She stood up slowly, making sure every phone captured her movement, then looked directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Her words hit like a physical blow, delivered with perfect clarity for the cameras. She wasn't angry or frustrated. She was performing, using our relationship as material for content that would generate views, comments, and engagement. The other influencers immediately started recording from multiple angles, recognizing viral content when they saw it. Phoenix actually smiled, probably calculating the publicity value of the drama. Someone's livestream was broadcasting the moment in real time, sending our private relationship crisis out to thousands of viewers. I looked at Sierra, searching for any hint of the woman I'd fallen in love with, but she was completely absorbed in her performance. She'd turned our 4-year relationship into entertainment for strangers, reducing years of shared experiences to a viral moment that would boost her follower count. I didn't argue, didn't plead or try to defend myself. Instead, I quietly gathered my camera gear while 7 phones continued recording my humiliation. The jungle around us was genuinely peaceful. Filled with natural beauty, these people were too busy performing to actually notice. As I walked away from the pavilion, I could hear Sierra already spinning the moment for her audience, explaining how some people just aren't ready for growth and transformation. That night, while Sierra partied with the group in the main lodge, I sat alone in our shared cabin, listening to their laughter drift through the jungle air. The woman I'd loved had publicly dismissed 4 years of our life together for content, and somehow I felt more relieved than devastated. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't trying to stay out of frame or position equipment for someone else's shot. I was just sitting quietly in a beautiful place, remembering what it felt like to experience something without documenting it. The real tragedy wasn't that Sierra had humiliated me in front of her influencer friends. It was that she'd become so addicted to social media validation that she couldn't distinguish between genuine emotions and performative content. Our entire relationship had become material for her brand, and I'd been too invested in loving who she used to be to recognize who she'd actually become. I finished packing by 3 in the morning, moving through our cabin like a ghost while Sierra's laughter echoed from the main lodge where she was celebrating with her influencer friends. Every piece of camera equipment I folded away felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been conscripted into her content creation machine. I left everything she'd bought me over the years, keeping only what was genuinely mine. The shuttle to San Jose left at 5 a.m., and I was the only passenger willing to travel that early. The driver, a local man named Carlos, didn't speak much English, but he seemed to understand when I handed him extra money and asked him to drive without stopping. As we wound down mountain roads in pre-dawn darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete silence. No ring lights humming, no phones buzzing with notifications, no one asking me to adjust a camera angle or hold a reflector. I left Sierra a note on her pillow, short and direct, using her own words back to her. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be weaponized for content. Just the truth in her own words. The flight from San Jose to Denver gave me 8 hours to process what had happened, but I spent most of that time staring out the window at clouds, deliberately avoiding my phone. I had no idea that clips from the live stream were already exploding across social media platforms, that strangers were dissecting our relationship breakdown in real time while I sat 30,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. When I finally powered up my phone after landing in Denver, I had 347 missed notifications. Messages from friends, family, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, all asking if I was okay, if I'd seen what was happening online. But I ignored them all and drove straight to my cabin in the mountains, craving the kind of silence that only exists away from civilization. My photography Instagram account, which had maintained a steady 15,000 followers for years, had gained 50,000 new ones overnight. Comments poured in from people who'd discovered my wilderness work through the viral clips, expressing amazement that someone capable of capturing such beauty had been treated so dismissively. They'd gone through my entire portfolio, sharing my climate change documentation and conservation photography with their own networks. But the real shock came when I finally watched the clips that had made me accidentally famous. The hashtag had started as Sierra's followers mocking my suggestion to actually meditate instead of filming it. Early posts showed people dramatically dismissing imaginary partners who weren't growth-minded enough for their lifestyle brands. However, public sentiment shifted dramatically within hours. Viewers began recognizing the cruelty in Sierra's dismissal, the calculated performance of humiliating someone she'd claimed to love. The hashtag transformed from mocking me to criticizing influencer culture's toxicity. People started sharing their own stories about partners who'd treated relationships like content opportunities rather than genuine connections. Sierra's follower count began dropping rapidly. Comments on her posts turned brutal as viewers connected her public persona of love and mindfulness with her willingness to humiliate her partner for entertainment. Brands started distancing themselves immediately, recognizing the liability of association with someone who'd displayed such calculated cruelty. The retreat company terminated Sierra's contract within 24 hours, releasing a statement about supporting authentic wellness experiences rather than manufactured drama. Phoenix, the brand coordinator who'd encouraged the toxic environment, was quietly let go after the company received hundreds of complaints from viewers who'd witnessed the live stream. Sierra's voicemails escalated quickly as the backlash intensified. Her messages revealed her inability to recognize that her own behavior had created the situation. She alternated between panic and anger, sometimes suggesting we make joint content to fix everything, other times blaming me for her career destruction. But I didn't respond. Instead, I posted a single photo on my Instagram, a mountain sunrise I'd captured years earlier, with a caption about sometimes needing to walk away to move forward. That post went viral independently of the retreat drama. Outdoor gear companies reached out about partnerships. National Geographic offered me assignment work documenting climate change in national parks. Documentary filmmakers wanted to feature my conservation photography in upcoming projects about environmental preservation. Meanwhile, Sierra's career imploded completely. Major sponsors canceled contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The supplement company that had paid for the Costa Rica retreat demanded she return their fee and cover the costs of replacing her content. Her management agency dropped her after other clients complained about association damage. Phoenix tried reaching out too, apparently hoping to salvage his reputation by associating with my unexpected popularity. But I'd already learned the difference between authentic purpose and manufactured content, between meaningful work and social media performance. 3 days after returning home, I hiked to a remote lake in the Colorado wilderness, carrying only my camera and camping gear. For the first time in years, I photographed something purely because it was beautiful, not because it might generate engagement or serve someone else's brand. The silence was profound, broken only by wind through pine trees and water lapping against granite shores. That night, lying in my tent under stars invisible from any city, I realized Sierra had accidentally given me the greatest gift possible. Her cruel dismissal had freed me from a toxic cycle I'd been too invested to recognize. I wasn't the one who couldn't keep up with her growth. I was the one who'd finally outgrown the need for her validation. The full scope of Sierra's betrayal became clear a week later, when screenshots from the retreat's private group chat leaked online. Someone, probably one of the other influencers seeking to distance themselves from the backlash, had shared the entire conversation thread that revealed the calculated nature of what I'd experienced as spontaneous cruelty. The messages painted a devastating picture of how Sierra had been discussing our relationship behind my back for months. She'd written about my traditional masculinity becoming a problem for her evolving brand aesthetic. Phoenix had been encouraging her behavior throughout, suggesting that her brand deserved an upgrade and that maybe the retreat would be the perfect opportunity to make changes. But the most devastating revelation came in messages Sierra had sent the night before the meditation session incident. She'd written about planning to end things with me after the trip, with Phoenix helping her see how much she'd been limiting herself by staying in our relationship. She'd even suggested documenting the breakup process as powerful content about choosing yourself over convenience. I stared at those screenshots for a long time, processing the fact that my 4-year relationship had been strategically terminated for social media content. Sierra hadn't humiliated me in a moment of poor judgment. She'd planned it as her exit strategy, using public embarrassment to create a narrative where she was the growth-minded protagonist and I was the limitation she'd courageously overcome. The leaked messages also revealed that Sierra and Phoenix had been developing a romantic connection throughout the retreat planning process. Their exchanges grew increasingly flirtatious as they discussed her brand evolution and his vision for helping her reach the next level of influence. I'd been unknowingly funding the planning stages of my own replacement, paying for Sierra's trips to LA for brand meetings that were apparently elaborate dates with her future boyfriend. Phoenix had been positioning himself as Sierra's upgrade path for months, feeding her ego while undermining our relationship. But Phoenix himself was revealed to be far less successful than he'd pretended. Other industry contacts exposed him as a mid-level coordinator who'd been inflating his influence and connections to impress Sierra. His major brand relationships were mostly small supplement companies and workout gear startups, not the luxury partnerships he'd been promising. Meanwhile, my accidental internet fame was opening doors I'd never imagined. The National Geographic assignment materialized into a year-long contract documenting Glacier Retreat in Alaska. Outdoor gear companies weren't just offering sponsorships. They were requesting my input on product development for professional photographers working in extreme environments. A documentary filmmaker named Sarah reached out about featuring my conservation work in a climate change film that already had Netflix distribution secured. She explained that my story represented something people were craving: authenticity in a world of manufactured experiences, purpose over performance. The contrast between my trajectory and Sierra's became more apparent daily. While she scrambled to salvage her influencer career through increasingly desperate content strategies, I was being offered opportunities to contribute to projects with genuine environmental impact. Publications wanted to feature my work not because of viral drama, but because my photography actually documented important conservation issues. Sierra eventually called me directly, her voice raw with desperation. She'd lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in contracts, couldn't afford her apartment lease renewal, and her car had been repossessed. She was probably going to have to move back in with her parents. Her pleas for me to post something supportive, just one post explaining that we'd both been stressed, fell on deaf ears. Her final voicemail accused me of letting the internet destroy her life over one mistake, one moment of bad judgment. But it hadn't been one mistake. It had been 4 years of gradual transformation, of our relationship becoming material for her personal brand until she couldn't distinguish between genuine emotions and performative content. The retreat had just been the moment when she'd finally revealed how completely she'd prioritized social media validation over human connection. Phoenix tried reaching out too, apparently hoping to salvage his reputation by associating with my unexpected popularity. But I'd already learned the difference between authentic purpose and manufactured content, between meaningful work and social media performance. I turned off notifications for all social media platforms and drove back into the mountains, carrying my camera toward places where the only validation that mattered came from capturing something beautiful enough to preserve. For the first time in years, I was working on projects that would outlast social media trends, documenting landscapes that needed protection more than I'd ever needed Sierra's approval. 3 months later, I was editing photos from my Alaska Glacier assignment when I heard a car engine struggling up the mountain road to my cabin. The sound was wrong, labored, like a vehicle that shouldn't be attempting the steep grade. I looked out my window to see a beaten-up Honda Civic with California plates slowly approaching, steam rising from under its hood. Sierra climbed out of the driver's seat and I barely recognized her. The polished influencer aesthetic was completely gone, replaced by someone who looked like she'd been living rough for weeks. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled like she'd been sleeping in them, and she'd lost enough weight that everything hung loose on her frame. She stood beside her broken car for a long moment, staring at my cabin like she couldn't believe she'd actually made the drive. When she finally approached my door, I could see that her hands were shaking, either from cold or nerves or both. I let her in and gave her water while she collapsed onto my couch like someone who'd been holding herself together through sheer willpower and had finally reached safety. She told me she'd lost everything: the apartment, the car payments, even her parents' respect. Her father wouldn't speak to her because of how she'd treated me. Her mother kept asking how she'd become someone who could humiliate a good man for internet points. Phoenix had dumped her 6 weeks ago, she continued, staring at her hands. Turns out he was only interested when she had followers and brand deals. Once the backlash started affecting his own reputation, he disappeared completely, blocked her everywhere, and told mutual contacts that she was too damaged for his brand. The irony was brutal. Phoenix had encouraged her to leave me for someone who operated at her level, then abandoned her the moment her level dropped below his usefulness threshold. She'd traded a 4-year relationship for a man who'd vanished the instant she stopped being profitable. She'd been living in her car for 3 weeks, showering at Planet Fitness, eating dollar menu items when she could afford food at all. She'd tried staying with friends, but everyone was tired of her drama. They'd all seen the leaked messages. They knew what she really did. The worst part, she admitted, was that she'd never wanted me to actually leave. She'd thought I'd fight for us, that the drama would create content that would boost her engagement, and then we'd work through it together publicly. She was so addicted to the performance of emotions that she couldn't tell the difference between real feelings and content opportunities anymore. This admission hit harder than her original betrayal. Sierra hadn't just humiliated me for social media content, she'd gambled our entire relationship on a manipulation strategy that had backfired completely. She'd been so consumed by social media metrics that she'd forgotten relationships weren't scripted performances with guaranteed outcomes. She'd kept waiting for me to call, to argue with her, to demand explanations, to give her some way to turn this into a redemption story we could share together. When I just disappeared completely, she realized I wasn't playing the same game she was. I'd actually walked away. I explained that she couldn't tell the difference between performance and reality anymore. She'd been living for social media validation so long that genuine emotions felt foreign to her. She broke down completely then, sobbing with the kind of raw desperation that couldn't be monetized or turned into content. She'd come to ask me to make a comeback video with her, thinking maybe if we showed people that we'd worked through everything, that love had conquered the drama. We could rebuild our following together. But sitting there, seeing how peaceful I looked, how centered I seemed, she realized how insane that sounds. The request revealed how completely Sierra still misunderstood what had happened between us. Even in her lowest moment, her first instinct was to turn our pain into content, to monetize our reconciliation for social media redemption. She couldn't conceive of healing that didn't involve public performance and audience engagement. I told her honestly that I didn't want to rebuild a following. I'd found work that mattered more than metrics, documenting climate change for people who wanted to preserve what we're losing, not for people who wanted to be entertained by other people's drama. She acknowledged that she'd been following my photography account, that the Alaska Glacier series was incredible. I was doing the work I'd always talked about doing, the work she'd kept interrupting for content creation. For a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I'd originally fallen in love with, someone capable of recognizing authentic beauty and meaningful purpose. She thought she needed professional help, she said finally. Not for content, not for a comeback story, but because she couldn't tell the difference between real emotions and performative ones anymore. She'd been living as a character for so long that she didn't know who she actually was underneath all the branding. This was the first genuine insight I'd heard from her since our relationship had ended. Sierra was finally recognizing that her problem wasn't bad luck or unfair public backlash, but a fundamental disconnection from authentic self-worth and genuine human connection. I offered to let her sleep on my couch that night and gave her money for gas and food, not because I wanted to restart our relationship, but because leaving someone stranded in the mountains would have been cruel regardless of our history. The next morning, I watched her drive away in her struggling Honda, hoping she'd find the help she needed, but knowing our time together was permanently finished. Over the following months, my story became something I'd never expected, a symbol for healthy boundaries in the digital age. The retreat incident had sparked a cultural conversation about social media addiction, toxic relationships, and the difference between authentic growth and performative self-improvement. I received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own experiences with partners who'd treated relationships as content opportunities rather than genuine connections. Mental health organizations reached out asking if I'd participate in discussions about digital wellness and authentic self-worth. Universities invited me to speak about maintaining personal integrity in an attention economy. But the most meaningful responses came from individuals who'd recognized their own toxic patterns in Sierra's behavior and were taking steps to rebuild their lives around genuine connection rather than social media validation. I started leading wilderness photography workshops specifically for people recovering from digital burnout. The program grew organically through word of mouth, attracting participants who were seeking meaningful experiences away from screens and social media pressure. We'd spend weeks in national parks, learning to see beauty without immediately documenting it for public consumption, finding value in moments that existed only for those present to witness them. One participant, a former Instagram influencer named Marcus, told me during a break from photographing alpine lakes that he'd been living his entire life as content for 3 years. Every meal, every conversation, every sunset had to be optimized for engagement. He'd forgotten that experiences could just be experiences, that he didn't need to share everything to validate that it happened. The workshops became a partnership with mental health organizations focused on helping people reconnect with authentic self-worth and genuine human connection. We worked with therapists who specialized in social media addiction, creating programs that used nature immersion and mindful photography to help people rebuild their relationship with reality rather than performance. Meanwhile, Sierra was attempting multiple comeback strategies, each one feeling more calculated than the last. First came the victim narrative, a tearful YouTube video titled "How the Internet Destroyed My Mental Health" that positioned her as someone who'd been unfairly punished for a moment of poor judgment. But viewers recognized the manipulation, pointing out that her poor judgment had been revealed as premeditated strategy through the leaked messages. Next was the mental health awareness campaign, where Sierra partnered with therapy apps and wellness brands to discuss her journey through social media addiction. But the collaboration felt hollow, like she was monetizing her trauma rather than genuinely healing from it. Comments sections filled with people noting that she seemed more interested in rebuilding her influence than accepting responsibility for her actions. Her final attempt was an expose about the dark side of influencer culture, where she revealed behind-the-scenes manipulation tactics and unhealthy brand relationships. The content was actually valuable and well-researched, but it felt like another performance, another angle to rebuild credibility, rather than genuine advocacy for change. Marcus observed after we'd watched one of Sierra's expose videos during a workshop discussion about authentic versus performative vulnerability that she was still trying to contentify everything. Even her criticism of influencer culture was being packaged for influence. She couldn't step outside the system she was criticizing. He was right. Sierra had become so deeply embedded in social media thinking that even her attempts at authentic disclosure felt like strategic content creation. She couldn't find a way to exist without an audience. Couldn't conceive of healing that didn't involve public documentation and external validation. My own career trajectory continued expanding in directions I'd never imagined. The National Geographic assignment led to a book deal documenting climate change impacts across North American wilderness areas. Publishers were interested in combining my photography with personal essays about finding authentic purpose in an attention-driven world, using my story as a framework for discussing broader cultural issues around digital wellness and meaningful work. Netflix approved funding for a documentary about my conservation photography, but I insisted on keeping the focus on environmental issues rather than personal drama. The film would follow my work, documenting glacier retreat, forest fire impacts, and species migration changes, using visual storytelling to make climate science accessible to broader audiences. The documentary director explained during pre-production meetings that my authenticity was what made this work powerful. I wasn't performing environmental concern for social media content. I was actually documenting real problems that needed attention, and that sincerity came through in every frame. The contrast between my trajectory and Sierra's became a case study that business schools and psychology programs use to illustrate the difference between authentic purpose and manufactured personal brands. My rejection of social media performance had led to opportunities that actually aligned with my values, while Sierra's pursuit of influence had cost her everything she'd thought would make her happy. I received periodic updates about Sierra through mutual acquaintances, though I never sought out the information. She'd eventually found work at an environmental nonprofit, using her marketing skills to promote conservation efforts rather than personal brands. The position paid a fraction of what she'd earned as an influencer, but it seemed to provide the kind of meaningful work she'd been searching for underneath all the performance. My friend David mentioned during one of his visits to my cabin that he'd heard she was actually doing good work there. Real environmental advocacy, not just wellness content with nature backdrops. No social media presence at all anymore. She'd apparently found something authentic, though it had taken losing everything for her to discover what actually mattered. The workshops I was leading had evolved into a full program that outdoor gear companies and mental health organizations were funding as corporate wellness initiatives. We were helping people from all backgrounds rediscover the difference between experiencing life and performing it, between finding validation through external metrics and developing authentic self-worth through meaningful work and genuine connection. Standing on a mountainside teaching a group of former social media addicts to photograph wildlife without immediately posting the images, I realized Sierra's cruel dismissal had launched me toward exactly the life I'd been meant to live. Her insistence that I couldn't keep up with her growth had freed me to grow in directions that actually mattered, toward work that would outlast any social media trend and relationships built on genuine connection rather than content opportunities. I met Luna during a conservation photography project in Yellowstone, 18 months after the retreat incident. She was a park ranger and wildlife biologist documenting wolfpack behavioral changes caused by increased tourism, and I was there photographing the intersection between human impact and ecosystem adaptation. Our first conversation happened at dawn beside a frozen lake, while we both waited for a pack to emerge from the tree line. Luna understood that the most important conservation stories weren't always the most visually dramatic ones. She'd been studying how constant human presence was altering wolfpack dynamics in subtle but measurable ways, and my photography was capturing the behavioral evidence her research needed to document. Our relationship developed slowly over months of fieldwork, built on shared values and genuine compatibility rather than content opportunities. Luna had no social media presence beyond a professional research account she rarely updated. She measured success through peer-reviewed publications and conservation impact rather than follower counts or engagement metrics. She told me one evening as we reviewed field notes in her research cabin that she didn't understand people who documented their entire lives for strangers. Why would you want to perform your happiness instead of just experiencing it? This was exactly the mindset I'd been craving for years. Someone who valued authentic experience over digital documentation, who understood that the most meaningful moments often happened away from cameras and crowds. Luna's approach to life reminded me of who I'd been before Sierra's influence had gradually shifted my priorities towards social media performance. We kept our relationship completely private, not as a secret but as something precious that belonged only to us. No couple photos for Instagram, no relationship announcements, no documentation of our adventures together. Just two people building something real without needing external validation to prove its worth. Meanwhile, Sierra had found unexpected stability working for the Rocky Mountain Environmental Alliance, a nonprofit focused on climate change advocacy and conservation education. Through David, I learned she'd started as a volunteer helping with their social media presence, but had gradually moved into program coordination and grant writing, using her communication skills for genuine environmental impact rather than personal brand building. Now, David reported during one of our monthly dinners that she was actually good at it. Real passion for the work. No self-promotion involved. She'd been there over a year now, and nobody at the office even knew about her influencer past. She went by her middle name and kept her head down, just focused on the mission. I was genuinely glad to hear Sierra had found meaningful work that aligned with her stated values rather than just her image management needs. The environmental movement needed people who understood digital communication, especially those who'd experienced firsthand the difference between authentic advocacy and performative activism. The surprising development came when Sierra reached out to me directly, not through desperate voicemails or dramatic gestures, but through a professional email to my conservation photography business. The Rocky Mountain Environmental Alliance wanted to feature my climate change documentation in their upcoming exhibition about human impact on wilderness areas. Sierra acknowledged in her email that our collaboration might be awkward, given our history, but my Glacier Retreat series was exactly what they needed to show people the reality of what we're losing. This wasn't about personal reconciliation, she wrote. It was about using my work to advance conservation goals that mattered more than either of us. The tone was completely different from any communication I'd received from Sierra before. Professional, focused on the mission rather than her personal feelings, acknowledging our past without trying to weaponize it for emotional manipulation. For the first time since our relationship had ended, she was approaching me as a colleague rather than as someone who owed her something. Luna and I discussed the collaboration request during a weekend camping trip in the Colorado Rockies. We were sitting beside our campfire, watching stars emerge as darkness settled over the mountain peaks when I brought up Sierra's email. Luna asked practical questions instead of expressing jealousy or concern about my ex-girlfriend's involvement. Was the exhibition legitimate? Would it actually advance conservation goals? When I confirmed that they were partnering with 3 other environmental organizations and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, that it was a serious project with real educational impact, she told me I should do it. My work deserved the largest possible audience, especially when it was being used for genuine conservation advocacy rather than personal brand building. This response exemplified everything I loved about Luna's approach to life and relationships. She was secure enough in our connection to prioritize meaningful work over personal insecurities, confident enough in my commitment to support opportunities that advanced shared values, even when they involved complicated personal history. I agreed to participate in the exhibition, working directly with the museum curators and other environmental organizations while maintaining minimal contact with Sierra personally. The collaboration was strictly professional, focused on creating educational impact rather than resolving personal drama. The exhibition opened 6 months later to significant attendance and positive media coverage. My glacier photography was featured alongside climate scientist research, indigenous community testimonies, and policy advocacy materials, creating a comprehensive presentation about climate change impacts that reached audiences who might never engage with environmental issues otherwise. And Sierra had coordinated much of the community outreach and educational programming, but she stayed completely in the background during the opening reception. No attempts at personal conversation, no social media posts about working with her former boyfriend, no effort to capitalize on our shared history for attention or sympathy. Luna observed after meeting Sierra briefly during the exhibition setup that she was different, more grounded than she'd expected based on my stories. Whatever healing she'd done seemed genuine. I agreed. The woman I'd glimpsed during her desperate visit to my cabin had apparently found authentic purpose through consistent work that mattered more than her personal image. Sierra had learned to exist without constant external validation, to find satisfaction through environmental impact rather than social media metrics. Our conversation at the exhibition was brief but cordial, focused entirely on the project's success rather than our personal history. For the first time since our relationship had ended, We were able to interact as two people who shared professional goals rather than as former romantic partners carrying emotional baggage. Sierra thanked me for contributing my work to the exhibition, noting that the Glacier series had gotten more people thinking about climate change than anything else they'd featured that year. I thanked her for putting together programming that actually educated people instead of just making them feel good about caring, recognizing that her event coordination had been genuinely effective rather than performative. We shook hands like colleagues and went our separate ways, both understanding that our collaboration had been successful precisely because it hadn't been about us personally. Sierra had finally learned to work toward goals larger than her own image management, while I'd found someone whose values aligned with mine completely. 2 years after the exhibition, I was sitting in the Denver International Airport waiting for a flight to Iceland when I received a text that made me smile. Luna had just confirmed that her Wolfpack research had been accepted for publication in the Journal of Wildlife Management, with my behavioral photography featured as supporting documentation. Our professional collaboration had become as natural and effortless as our personal relationship, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to conservation work that mattered. My own career had evolved beyond anything I'd imagined possible during those dark months with Sierra. The climate change photography book had become a bestseller, leading to speaking engagements at universities and environmental conferences across the country. More importantly, the work was actually influencing policy discussions, with several images being used in congressional hearings about wilderness protection funding. The Netflix documentary about my conservation photography had premiered 3 months earlier to critical acclaim and substantial viewership. But I'd insisted on keeping the focus entirely on environmental issues rather than personal drama, using the platform to educate audiences about climate change impacts rather than exploiting my viral fame for entertainment value. Luna and I had been together for over 2 years, and our relationship remained intentionally private and grounded in reality rather than social media performance. We'd bought a small cabin together near Rocky Mountain National Park, close enough to both our work locations, but isolated enough for the kind of quiet life we both craved. No couple photos on Instagram, no relationship announcements, no documentation of our happiness for public consumption. Luna told me one morning as we drank coffee on our deck, watching elk graze in the meadow below our cabin, that she loved that nobody knew about us. Our relationship existed only for us, not for anyone else's entertainment or validation. This was exactly the kind of authentic connection I'd been searching for during all those years with Sierra. Someone who valued experience over documentation, who measured relationship success through private satisfaction rather than public approval, who understood that the most meaningful moments often happened away from cameras and crowds. Sierra's transformation had continued steadily, and she'd become a respected voice in the environmental movement. I followed her work peripherally through professional networks, watching her develop genuine expertise in conservation policy and community organizing. She'd been promoted to program director at the Rocky Mountain Environmental Alliance and was frequently quoted in environmental publications, though she maintained no personal social media presence whatsoever. David mentioned during one of our quarterly catch-up dinners that she was speaking at the Climate Action Summit. Real policy stuff, not influencer activism. She'd become one of the most effective advocates in the state for wilderness protection legislation. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sierra had found her authentic voice only after losing the artificial platform she'd thought defined her worth. Her environmental advocacy was more influential than her wellness content had ever been, precisely because it served genuine conservation goals rather than personal brand management. The most surprising development came through an unexpected invitation. The International Climate Photography Awards wanted to honor my conservation work with their Lifetime Achievement recognition, and Sierra's Environmental Alliance was one of the sponsoring organizations. The ceremony would bring together photographers, scientists, and advocates from around the world to celebrate visual storytelling that advanced climate action. Luna encouraged me to accept the award, recognizing the platform it would provide for conservation messaging. "My work deserved the widest possible recognition," she said, "and the networking opportunities could lead to collaborations that really mattered for environmental protection." The awards ceremony was held in a Denver conference center, with attendees representing the intersection of visual arts and environmental advocacy. I'd prepared remarks focusing on the responsibility photographers have to document climate change impacts rather than just pursuing aesthetically pleasing imagery. Sierra was there in her professional capacity, having helped coordinate community outreach for the event. She looked completely different from the desperate woman who'd appeared at my cabin 2 years earlier, and nothing like the polished influencer who'd humiliated me in Costa Rica. This version was confident but not performative, engaged with meaningful work rather than image management. She congratulated me on the recognition when our paths crossed during the networking reception, noting that my glacier documentation had influenced more policy discussions than I probably realized. They referenced my work regularly in their legislative advocacy efforts. I thanked her and mentioned that I'd been following her organization's wilderness protection campaigns. She was doing important work. She told me she'd finally found something worth caring about more than herself, speaking with a self-awareness that would have been impossible during our relationship. It had taken losing everything to realize how empty her priorities had been. We talked briefly about conservation policy and photography's role in environmental education, two professionals discussing shared goals rather than former romantic partners rehashing personal history. The conversation was pleasant and productive, focused entirely on work that mattered more than either of us individually. Sierra continued, saying she owed me an apology that went beyond what she'd said at my cabin, not just for how she'd treated me, but for the example she'd been setting about relationships and success and what actually mattered in life. She'd been teaching thousands of young women that love meant finding someone to fund your lifestyle rather than build something meaningful together. This acknowledgement meant more than any personal apology could have. Sierra was recognizing the broader impact of her choices, the way her public behavior had influenced other people's understanding of healthy relationships and authentic success. I told her honestly that I was glad she'd found work that aligned with her actual values. The environmental movement needed people who understood communication and community organizing. She responded that she was glad I hadn't let her toxicity destroy my belief in genuine connection. She could tell from how I talked about my work that I was finally with someone who appreciated who I actually was. Walking back to my hotel that evening, I reflected on how completely both our lives had changed since that morning in Costa Rica when Sierra had dismissed me for suggesting we actually experience meditation instead of filming it. Her cruel words had accidentally freed me from a relationship that was slowly destroying my sense of authentic self-worth, while her public humiliation had launched me toward the career and partnership I'd been meant to find. Sierra had needed to lose everything to discover what actually mattered, while I'd needed her rejection to recognize my own worth. Both of us had found authentic purpose, though through completely different paths of growth and healing. The next morning, Luna met me at the airport when I returned from the awards ceremony. No cameras, no social media posts about her supportive partner, just genuine happiness about my professional recognition and curiosity about the connections I'd made for future conservation projects. She asked how seeing Sierra had been, and I told her honestly that it had been productive. We were both different people now, focused on work that mattered more than personal drama. Sierra had become someone who used her skills for genuine environmental impact instead of self-promotion. Luna responded without jealousy or insecurity that this was good for Sierra and good for the environmental movement. They needed people who understood how to communicate effectively about conservation issues. That evening, sitting on our deck watching sunset light fade from the mountain peaks, I realized Sierra's dismissal had led me to everything I'd actually been searching for. Meaningful work that would outlast social media trends, a partner who valued authentic connection over public performance, and the peace that comes from living according to your actual values rather than external expectations. Sierra had told me I couldn't keep up with her growth, but she'd actually been preventing me from growing in directions that truly mattered. Her cruel rejection had accidentally launched both of us toward our authentic selves, though it had taken years of different healing processes to reach that understanding. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become unexpected gifts, freeing us from toxic patterns we'd been too invested to recognize and launching us toward the lives we'd been meant to live all along.